So welcome to the Property Show. I'm Matt Turner of Astute Property Search, and today you're actually going to be joined by another property finder, Robert Bruce, Relocation. Robert works in the east of England and sort of the home counties just north of London. We're going to be speaking about some areas that he feels are good for investment. So if you haven't really got the London budgets, today's show is definitely one to tune into. Just quickly, if you listened to the show last week, you'll know that Ogo was expecting a baby, and he has actually had a baby girl, named her Chiasoka. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. So anyway, congratulations to him. So good news to start the show off with. Great, so I'm with Robert Bruce, Robert Bruce Relocation today. I've jumped in my car and drove about an hour and a half north of London. We're in a lovely little village, is this, or a town, Robert? We're in
a town.
A town, St Neots.
St Neots.
St Neots, there you go. When you don't know the area, you end up pronouncing it wrong. But you're saying it's got some history from Cornwall, is it?
That's right. St Neots came up on a pilgrimage from Cornwall a long time ago and decided to stay here, so he liked it. I think he liked the river. It's a lovely River Ouse going through St Neots. Very popular with the boat racing fraternity, as well as with the cruisers and so on as well. Nice spot, market town, market square. Lots of character. So I guess Mr. St Neots back in the days doing what we're hoping a lot of people are doing now, is buying property out in the home counties. Yeah? Indeed, yes.
Moving out from London. So Robert, actually, so you help. You essentially do my job, but out in the countryside here, don't you?
That's right. Yes, I've decided that I'd like to. Well, I've always loved property. Liked helping people. A strong customer service ethic and researching. Helping people solve problems, and looking for a new home requires a lot of stamina. I'm someone who's got the stamina to go out and do that, I think, and I enjoy that. Yeah,
so I suppose my searches that I do in London are quite, you're in, let's say we were talking about West Hampstead before, I would be normally just in that town so I could walk around. I suppose for your searches, they're quite spread over vast distances, they could be.
Absolutely, yes. From here across the Suffolk coast is pretty well 100 miles.
Yeah.
So yes, it's always a case of getting in the car and
not walking.
not walking as a rule. No, unless it's the centre of Cambridge or centre of Norwich. But otherwise, a lot of driving to do.
I suppose it's probably. People having second homes, moving out from London. You can go in obviously all directions. You're catering for, I guess, the northern and eastern exit, I suppose, aren't you, from London?
That's right. So it's all points north and east, really. So the counties through Hertfordshire, Essex, Cambridgeshire, Bedfordshire, and then further up into Norfolk, Suffolk, and Essex. So it's a big patch, and it's a very popular area because, I suppose, compared to the southern area out of London, there's a lot of good value to be had in places like Suffolk, for instance, and yet still commutable. And I think it's the three things of coast, country, and countryside and commuter type towns and villages that appeal to people, and generally speaking, pretty good value for money historically. But become more and more popular, particularly hotbeds in Hertfordshire have become very popular, and the centre of Cambridge is, prices are just the same as expensive as in London in the centre of Cambridge. I suppose you've got the obviously it's big university towns and must drive the market somewhat. Certainly in Cambridge, the science parks and companies that are there has become extremely popular. I was reading a survey recently of the so-called £1 million streets in the country, and it was saying where those £1 million streets were in each region of the country, and there's only 2 locations in East Anglia that were called out. One was in Cambridge, and I think they've got 2 or 3 streets where the average price is over £1 million.
Okay.
And one other is in a town called Woodbridge on the Suffolk coast, which is quite unusual in a way, but it's a very nice town, having said that.
Oh, wow.
But it highlights really how hot Cambridge is in terms of house prices. And yes, very, very popular place. So you've got a lovely city in Cambridge. You've also got a lovely city in Norwich, although in Norwich it's that much further. It's from London. It's pretty well 2 hours commute, so it takes quite a lot of patience to sit in a train and rely on that being on time every time from Norwich. But Norwich is I think it was recently voted the happiest city in the UK to live in.
Oh, really?
Whatever that. I've just come back from Copenhagen, which is the happiest city in Europe or the world to live in, apparently.
Okay.
But Norwich is the UK happiest city to live in.
Is the equivalent.
And my daughter lives in Norwich. I've worked in Norwich many years ago, and I can back that up as it's a fantastic city. I keep trying to persuade her not to think about moving.
Must be the fresh air that comes off the coast, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a bit of being near to the coast. You can have an afternoon out and go and see the seals on the sand at Winterton, or you can enjoy a huge range of shopping facilities. The shopping facilities are second to none, and also at the same time you've got culture. It's got a castle and a museum and a nice river running through it. It's a super place. So
I've not been. You just reminded me actually from my A-level geography days, because if you look at a map, it's quite sort of designed as it's like a market town. Like you've got the Norwich in the centre, then you've got other sort of towns serving it, and it's kind of done like a car. I can't remember. It was like a German guy,
Kristalla.
Is that wow? Okay.
Funnily enough, I was speaking to my son about this theory the other night, which was using Norwich, because with Norwich, I think you've got places like Dereham to the west, which is actually a very good value town, but you've got Dereham, and then you've got Lowestoft and Yarmouth, and then going south into Diss and north into Wroxham. You've got that satellite effect. But I was telling my son about this Kristalla theory.
I'm glad you remember his names. I was just thinking, when you said that, I was like, it's Chris something. That's helped me out there.
Yeah, I thought it was a good theory. It does apply generally, and it certainly Norwich is a brilliant example of that. And then you hop across to King's Lynn, which is probably the next example. But at Super City anyway, in Norwich, definitely recommend it.
Shouldn't talk about my A-levels. I didn't do very well in them in the end, but I passed the geography one, so that was fine. So you mentioned that £1 million street in Suffolk. Is that really going to be then sort of holiday homes, or is that people actually living there all year round, do you think?
Well, it's principally people living all year round, and the pull of the university and everything that brings with it, and the popularity of Cambridge itself. It's not a city, it's a town, and it's not that big a town really, and in many ways therefore the supply of property is perhaps not as great as it might be in other places like Norwich, for instance. So the supply of property is fairly small. It's highly sought after. It's you can work in London comfortably and live in Cambridge, and you've got some lovely surrounding countryside. So it's got it all. It's got the countryside. It's got the commuter appeals as well. It's got the university. It's got all the history attached to it. So there's employment levels are very strong. It's got a good high social demographic base really in terms of employment. So it is, there's a lot going for it. Having said that, as soon as you come out of Cambridge city centre itself, the property prices reduce dramatically. I'm not saying they're cheap, but they do reduce dramatically. So you can still enjoy, being next to Cambridge without necessarily having to pay huge sums of money. Those £1 million streets, you can get away from those and literally, well, maybe not half a mile, but certainly a mile away from those £1 million streets, you can buy some lovely property for half that price. And so it's a very attractive place to live. And again, out on its own, it's got a John Lewis, and that always appeals to people. And
the sort of Waitrose theory, I suppose.
Absolutely.
What supermarket have we got here? And you can kind of tell the level of house prices and the type of people, I suppose, that are living in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's been part of the market generally in East Anglia up until 2016. Has been very good, very buoyant, and it reached a peak in 2016 when Eastern England had the highest house price growth in the country. And then 2017, it's just throttled back quite a bit. So the price rises on average are about half what they were in 2016. So 2017 has been a lot slower, nearer to the 3 to 5%. 2018, depending on which survey and forecast you read, is probably going to be about 3% on average when you compare to 2016, which was around 12%. So it's come down quite a lot, but it's enjoyed several years of good growth. But obviously within that, you've got towns and villages that have still enjoyed double-digit growth in that period in 2017, and others that have almost stood still.
Yeah.
But there's some good drivers for the region. Obviously, there's the southern end of it, which is the commuter belt. People who also want to leave London and sell, a terrace property for £1 million and find that they can buy a few acres and quite a grand place.
You're not going to say stables, are you? Please don't say, because my girlfriend's got 2 horses and she just I just know that she's going to want, let's move out here. We're going to get we can get 4 horses now. We're going to say, oh dear, so we can't buy any stables up here. Don't mention stables.
Oh, I see, right.
Should be cottoning on and we'll be moving out before we know it.
Well, there's a very good. There's an estate agent who specialises in equestrian properties.
Oh dear.
To that extent that it highlights.
Is he just gone bust? Please tell me it doesn't exist anymore.
No, they seem to be quite popular. So there's certainly the appeal of the quality of life, getting out into the country, and for some people getting out to the coast as well is very attractive, and you can potentially live with a sea view and a bigger property than you had in London, and at the same time still manage to get into London a couple of days a week if you like. So there's a lot going for it. And then communications wise, well, we've got the M1 running up the sort of left-hand side of the region. You've got the M11 going up the middle, the A14 going across the region, and all those, particularly the M11 and the A14, are seeing improvements at the moment in them, which is going to further make it more attractive. And then obviously Stansted and Luton airports. You've got the East Coast Main Line going up. So communications are pretty good, really. That's most of the drivers. And at the same time, interest rates have stayed low. Don't look as though they're going to go increase particularly in the next year or two. You've got a bit of help for first-time buyers with stamp duty, and a general lack of supply of properties coming onto the market. It just will probably mean that prices will at least stay firm in the coming year, if not increase like they did do in the years up to 2016.
Yeah, no, I suppose, Cambridge, I know you can get, is it 35 minutes into King's Cross, I think, into central town, I think. It
might be a little bit more than that, but there are probably some trains.
I think there was a fast one, and I think you get the wrong one, it takes about an hour, but I think there was a speedy one.
Well, instantly it's here. There's a train you can get early morning that will get you into King's Cross in 37 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And certainly 50 minutes from St Neots to King's Cross is the norm. There are trains a bit longer, but so there's a lot of commuters from St Neots every day into King's Cross, and prices slowly have rippled out up that train line, really. And likewise with Cambridge. And then in places like Bedford, just across the border, Bedford's 10 miles away. Bedford's now got improved train links into London, so into St Pancras, you can get into St Pancras in 39 minutes from Bedford, and that's an area, a town that's up and coming, definitely. And likewise, I was reading recently that going further down into Bedfordshire, Luton is seen as the top commuter town for 2018, based on if you're willing to travel anything up to an hour, commuter-wise, and you look at the price of a season ticket versus the average price of property, where's the best place to live? Well, Luton is only half an hour into St Pancras, and the value of property, the price of property vis-a-vis London is so much better, so much more attractive, that's seen as the place to go to. But likewise, St Neots, on the other side of St Neots, on the east side of St Neots, over the last 10 years, nearly 6,000 homes have been built. They're just about to start another 3,000 homes. So it's a place that's it's the fastest. St Neots is the fastest growing town in Cambridgeshire. That's its claim to fame at the moment. But you go a bit further up the line, Huntingdon, again, a very strong commuter town. Peterborough is a real hotspot, also not only in price rises, but certainly for the future, probably a good value town, because the train times are planned to improve even better than they are at the moment. So they're talking about getting train times down from just under an hour to more like 40 minutes. And Peterborough is a good spot to be on, not only on the East Coast Main Line, on the A1. Again, it's got a John Lewis, it's got a pretty good shopping centre, and lots of housing, lots of choice. So it's a place to watch.
So I mean, let's just look at, I don't know what a standard property would be, a 4-bedroom house in the area. I mean, what kind of budget level is that going to be?
Well, if it
like the new builds that they're building around here, then.
So St Neots, where we're pretty well sitting now, a 4-bedroom detached, is about £400,000.
Okay.
And then where they're building the third time, not far similar, not far much different to that actually. Maybe because of the volume and so on, it might take the price down a little bit, but then there's a premium for new housing, so they're going to be up around that figure.
So it's kind of like a 1-bedroom flat in London in some places.
Absolutely.
Or a studio.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Some areas you can just about get where I live, you'd be able to get a 2-bedroom terrace house, Victorian house, where I live. But generally that's a 1-bedroom flat.
Absolutely.
If that, yeah.
Well, in the region, you've got a great variety. I'd say the average price of a property in East Anglia is $325,000.
Okay.
But you've got huge variances. So Norfolk is the cheapest county.
Yeah.
And Hertfordshire is the most expensive, as you'd expect, and prices in Hertfordshire on average are double what they are in Norfolk.
Right, okay.
So if you want to buy, say, a detached property in Norfolk, you would spend about $320,000 on average.
Yeah.
And there are variances all over
sure.
the place, depending on the sunny side of the street or whatever. But you'd have to spend well over $700,000 on average in Hertfordshire to get a detached property.
Yeah.
So there's a huge variance in prices, and if you go to the other end, you can pick up a flat in Norfolk for 120,000, 130,000 very easily, and some less than that. In Hertfordshire, again, it's 250 to 300,000 for a flat.
So I suppose on that, I mean, the rental yields are probably very good in Norfolk, I would say then.
Pretty good, yes. The demand isn't there as strongly as it is in other southern towns and cities, really, partly because of the price to buy a property is that much more attractive. So it doesn't exclude so many people. The affordability of a property in parts of Norfolk is very attractive. So people can afford to buy earlier on in their life and not have to rent for until they're 40 or whenever the figure is in London now. Yeah. So the yields are perhaps not as strong on rentals as you might think they might be, but overall, yes, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, like a yield in London, if you're getting 2.5%, 3% after your service charge, you're doing very, very well.
Really, right? Yes.
Which obviously is better than having your money in the bank account, but
yes.
You're hoping obviously for capital growth at the same time. But I mean, as you push out of town, I guess it will get better. I mean, what would be, if someone came to you and said, I've got, £400,000, let's say, and they were looking for a rental investment. We'll look at another way. What type of property would they be? A 1-bedroom flat as well? Or would you say sort of still go for a house in maybe target like a university town then or something? What would be?
I suppose that there's 3 areas you'd be looking at for their money. Is just in summary would be what would be their commuting needs? Yeah. Are they going to want to get into London regularly, every day, 4 days a week? Which, if that's the case, then they need to be in an arc really that tops at Peterborough. Some might be willing to go as far as King's Lynn and so on, but that's for me a step too far. But you could go as far as Peterborough, in which case 400,000 would buy you a very nice detached property in a nice area, maybe a nice village on the outskirts of Peterborough. You can go west of Peterborough and you've got some very nice, almost Cotswold type stone properties.
When the villages, obviously, because a lot of people maybe living, if you're living in London listening to this, village life has kind of gone a little bit. I mean, are these villages that still got butchers, greengrocers? Is kind of that feel still to it?
You can find those. Yeah. I agree that you might have to be in a larger village, a small town, to achieve those sorts of things, because wherever it is across the country, the pubs have been closing, haven't they? The post offices have been closing, and schools and so on. So it's you can pick out some nice villages where you've still got a pub and a shop at least. But around Peterborough, for instance, where you can commute and you can get a seat on the train in the morning as well from Peterborough, because you're at the top of the Thameslink. First Trains Connect.
Was that Jeremy Corbyn on the floor, wasn't it? Was that from Peterborough?
That was on Virgin Trains, I think he was, cross country or something.
Okay.
So, but yes, somewhere around that gets you a very nice property. And around where we are at the moment, likewise, you can buy a nice detached property, probably walk to the station and commute if you like. And then going round, you'd have to carry that arc round to places across to Cambridge and Ipswich and into Essex. And then once you're over that way into places like Colchester and Chelmsford, you're going to get less for your money, really. And 400,000 might be a nice semi, but not a detached property. So there's the commuter aspect to it. And that 400,000, as we've already mentioned, in Hertfordshire, if you want to go down the line and get to places like Hitchin, which is only then 20 minutes, half an hour into London, brilliant. But that type of money might get you, a reasonable semi. Maybe you might be able to walk to the station, perhaps you won't, and much less. So there's that aspect. If you're someone who wants to buy a nice property on the coast, North Norfolk, Suffolk coastline, Essex coastline, then, as you know, with a sea view, a premium, £400,000, for instance, doesn't necessarily buy you too much. So on the North Norfolk coast, in places like Burnham Market and Blakeney and Wells, you've got to be paying probably nearer £500,000 for an average property. It could well be detached, but you won't have a sea view. And there's plenty of sea view properties where you've got to pay £1 million up in that region. And likewise, we were talking earlier on, going into Suffolk, places like Southwold, Walberswick, Aldeburgh, places like that, very nice towns. I mean, I think Aldeburgh is something like the second or the most expensive coastal town in the country. Aldeburgh. Okay. Aldeburgh, as in Benjamin Britten lived in Aldeburgh, created the Snape Festival Hall, very popular with the musical and arts and crafts societies. And that in Aldeburgh, I think the average price for a property is something like £490,000. So again, 400,000 probably buys you a reasonable semi, but it doesn't buy you much more than that. If you want to have a nice sea view, then it's much, it's certainly above £500,000. So you've got places like that, and into Essex, there's places like Thorpe Bay near Southend, Leigh-on-Sea, very pleasant. And again, you can commute from places like that, but 400,000 doesn't buy you an awful lot. Again, you wouldn't tend to get a detached property in a nice area for that sort of money. So there's value for money probably over in the inland western half of the region. If you want to go and get something on the coastline, then it's going to cost you a lot of money. In Southwold, we talked about a nice sea view terrace could be £1 million.
Wow.
And
that's a shame, because I was we were talking off air. My in-laws live that way. We spent might have been the 27th or 28th, went to the beach in Southwell, and it's such a lovely village.
It is.
It's I'm sure there are other little villages along there, but you find one and you tend to go back there every year. And little man was running on the beach, and you're looking up. Obviously got an eye on the properties, and I suppose the beach huts probably even cost quite a bit.
The beach huts are £100,000, so that's.
And you can't live in those.
And you can't live in them. You can make a cup of tea in them, and that's it.
Wow.
And there's quite a bit of competition for those as well. So I suppose that it's become extremely popular. If you go a bit further north, and taking like the Aldeburgh example with Benjamin Britten, who lived in Aldeburgh, he was actually born in Lowestoft. Now Lowestoft, the prices are half what they are in Aldeburgh, and unfortunately Lowestoft has not perhaps always had the best of reputations with people. It's suffered a bit over the years, employment wise, but actually as a town, the beach is superior. In Lowestoft, you have one of the best beaches in the country, Golden Sands, no stones, and the town itself is full of Victorian architecture, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you want a lovely sea view apartment, then
it's
certainly you will easily get one for £400,000 in Aldborough, in Lowestoft, sorry. So there's a lot of good value to be had in places like that town. And the same goes further down in Essex. Clacton doesn't appeal to everybody, but if you want some really good value for money, that's the place to go to.
You are listening to The Property Show with Matt Turner of Astute Property Search. If you have any property-related questions that you would like to ask Matt, you can email him at matt, with 2 T's, at astutepropertysearch.co.uk.
And it's quite commendable the knowledge of the area that you have. I mean, I'm obviously I deal in London, and there's so many people, and each town's different. But the geographical area that you're covering, that's it's like Google Maps, isn't it?
Well,
you get a huge area.
I suppose I was born in Lowestoft, and lived in a village south of there. We talked about Kessingland, which is, again, a great little place for value. Not everybody's cup of tea, but a great little place for value. And and a village that's been very popular with people in the past moving out of London who want to, get into some sort of coastal village. But I was brought up there. So I worked there, went to school there. I lived and worked in Norwich. And then ultimately, having moved all around the country, I've moved house something like 10 times. So I know all the ups and downs of house buying and house selling and all the things that can go wrong. And I remember just a little anecdote, moving into a house in Hull, and we'd been living in hotel accommodation for a couple of weeks, waiting for a new house to be ready. The day of the moving in, the removal van turned up on the drive from Harrogate, where we'd moved from. And the removal guys opened the van up only to find that half the van was empty. They'd forgotten to load half our crates of furniture from the store. But I've been through about 10 house moves. I know all the ups and downs of...
You've moved 10 times?
Yeah, 10 times, yeah. Okay. So I've been through all that, but ultimately came back to live in St Neots and travel regularly over still up to the East Coast. I've had relatives in all sorts of places across East Anglia, and my daughter lives up in Norwich. So it's an area and a region that's very close to my heart, and I've lived effectively half my life in it. And I travel up and down also into parts of North London regularly. My son lives in northwest London, so I get out about into Hertfordshire and so on as well. So overall get a feel of the region, I suppose, over that period.
It's commendable the area that you're, the towns that you know. And I mean, I've you mentioned Clacton. We used to go to Walton on the Naze, in the summer quite a lot.
Yes.
Play cricket on the beach when the tide was out, sort of thing. I haven't been back for a long while, actually. I think my parents still pop back there, but that's a nice little town. It is.
I mean, Essex is, again, got all sorts of perceptions, hasn't it, amongst people, but Essex has got a lovely coastline. I mean, Essex, I was reading recently, has got 35 islands in Essex. Yeah. And so if you want to perhaps get on an island, you can do. I suppose you can go to Canvey Island and treat yourself as being on an island. But it's, there's a lot going for places like that. Chelmsford as a city, I think, was recently shown in a study to be the best value town in the south of England, in the sense that if you look at the price of property and the profile of people who live there, then actually their house price to income ratio is really good. The properties are very affordable, and a lot of people obviously want to commute from places like Chelmsford, so you can have quite a good quality of life in a place like that, still have the Essex coast and countryside on your doorstep. So Yeah, there's a lot of.
I suppose that's not too far outside of London, is it? Either?
No.
The M25 is just right next to it. It will,
Absolutely.
Get you around in different bits. And I think one other point as well. I think the weather. I think I'm right in saying East Anglia, it rains less. It's got the least amount of rainfall, isn't it? Is that right?
The driest part of the country.
Yeah.
Yes, the further east you go.
Yeah.
Although they said that when I lived in Hull,
and it did, yeah.
And I think that was the same thing.
Didn't leave home without an umbrella.
So it was pretty. It was pretty dry there actually. So yes, the climate's pretty good, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think there's opportunities for people who want second homes and holiday homes in the region, albeit that in some of those places I mentioned, the premiums are quite high for property.
Yeah.
But a lot of people want to retire and perhaps look for market towns, and the area is full of market towns and villages that perhaps aren't too far from the coast. Mm-hmm. So rather than paying a premium of however many tens of thousands to live, within a walk of the beach, if you move a few miles inland and are quite happy to take the dog for a walk and jump in the car, then you can get a nice property in a nice village. Perhaps also avoid the summer traffic, as we were again talking earlier on. In quite often in the very popular seaside resorts, it's difficult to park in the summer, so you can go off inland a bit and go to some very nice towns and villages. I mean, Framlingham is very popular, particularly as Ed Sheeran comes from Framlingham.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, he's just again his song in 2017, "Castle on the Hill," is effectively all about Framlingham Castle.
Okay.
So that when he talks about the castle on the hill is the castle in Framlingham.
So there's probably a lot of Ed Sheeran fans making a pilgrimage there.
Absolutely, there is. Yes, I can take you to where that is, Matt, and where he's sitting when he's looking at it as well. But yes, good schools in Framlingham, but that's a popular town, mm-hmm. and it's got the best of both worlds really in terms of not being too far from the coast. You can get into places like Ipswich and commute if you want to as well. And I was just reading an article by a lady who writes in the Times, and she's India Knight. She's just moved to a village near Framlingham, and it's a popular place.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose the people buying holiday homes. Has that probably been affected by that 3% tax? Their second home. That's dissuaded people from getting out and hunting for their holiday home?
Yes, I'm sure it will have affected some. I think that for many of the people who are buying them, the 3% A wouldn't have put them off, and B, for a lot of them, they're able to, they will be renting out their property for many weeks of the year. And when a property, a popular coastal property is quite often £500-700 a week, often a lot more. But certainly, to rent a holiday cottage in Aldeburgh, you would have to start at about £400 to £500 a week, and that would be quite a small property. So I suppose it's risk and reward really. If you're willing to lay out and pay that extra 3%, you can also charge some premium prices for those popular locations.
So I suppose with that, that's you've touched on it. It's a fantastic investment by the coast. You get to use them yourself, and then Airbnb or other firms, I suppose, that take it over, and you're getting some cracking income.
Absolutely. There's lots of, as you say, holiday cottage firms very happy to take your property and rent it out for good money during the rest of the season when you're not there. And I suppose you can agree your weeks in advance and know when you're going to be there, and also use it as a weekend home in the winter as well.
No, definitely. So just quickly, put me at easy. There's a Southwold, there's that nice little 2-bed cottage in Southwold then that's by the sea. But I'm looking at it and thinking, how much is that going to be? What we're talking.
You might be better going for your stables at this rate. That kind of place there's one or two places in the high street that would be 400,000 plus, really. There's some very small places, unfortunately, that are extremely small. Barely a courtyard as a back garden, perhaps enough place to put a refuse bin. then
as long as there's not enough room to put a horse.
No, there's
not
no room to put a horse.
Yeah.
And they would be 400,000.
Wow.
The difficulty, of course, then still comes that you've got to park.
Yeah.
So where you try and park sometimes is just as big a problem. So, if you want somewhere that's got parking, and I always say with a place like Southwold, if you just go, half a mile, barely a mile down the road into Raiden, which is the next village down.
I remember seeing that.
Then you can buy somewhere twice as big for your money, or half the price, whatever, and have somewhere to park, and probably just walk or cycle into the town if you really.
You probably miss out on all the tourists turning up as well. So
that's
they might drive
right.
past you, but you're not being, they're not in your face so much, are they?
No, that's right.
Probably is more locals that are living there.
Absolutely, yes. You've got the peace and quiet, and also being in a nice part of the world as well.
Yeah.
So there's a nice village across the other side of the water from Southwold called Walmerswick, where actually, to go aside from my uncle, who's passed away many years ago now, bless him, but he ran the village pub in his family called the Anchor, and Walmerswick has become a very popular place for all sorts of people, but particularly people on the stage, stage and screen, people in BBC, all sorts of people have moved up there and moved up permanently. But that's another place where there's a lot of holiday homes, very expensive property, very nice, quite remote, unless you take there's a little ferry goes across the river. It's literally someone rowing a boat where about 10 people maximum can get in, and they charge you a few pounds to go across the river, if you're happy to do that. But that's the only connection to Southwell. Otherwise, you've got to go probably you can walk round, which is probably about 3 miles, or you can drive round, which is probably about 7 or 8 miles. So it's quite remote, Walmerswick, but very nice, very popular with people. So that's another one. If you can find your stables and a holiday home
get
there.
rid of these horses. We don't want to get
Have to work a few more years as yet.
Yeah, 100% on that one. I suppose, from our discussion there, my next question's technically been answered in that obviously you're a property finder, and I was, that's what I do, but I was going to be a little bit blunt and say, why would people look to use you rather than just going to estate agents themselves? Obviously you've covered it on your immense knowledge, and it is commendable, the towns that you know. But what's the main driver, do you think? Why do people look to use you?
I think ultimately there's a few things. I think they will end up with a better result, hopefully, at the end of it. There's a potential for a better property in a better location at a better price. And I say better property in the sense that their ideal home, perhaps it may never come on the market because the person who's selling it maybe doesn't want to put it on the market, or it might just be that when I would be doing all that ringing round of the estate agents every other day, all that legwork, which is really difficult to keep up with, but nevertheless get in front of estate agents to find out what's coming on. As you know, you then find out what property is coming on the market, and then perhaps you can make sure you're the first person through the door to have a look at it, probably before it's even gone in the window, and that might just be the one that is the property, the ideal home, which the purchasers, the customers and clients you're working with will perhaps never have got to see. So there's a potential for a better property. I think there's also possibly the potential for within that, obviously, a better location. If you know a little bit more about the locations that you're looking at for people. We've just talked about lots of towns and villages and all those places. And as you know, when you're looking in London, you'll know the right streets, the best streets, the right end of the street, and the ones that are near the park or etc. And likewise in East Anglia, it's a case of knowing the nuances really between different villages. They're all perhaps very pleasant, but some are just a bit more pleasant than others, and we're in a town or a village. So there's a potentially for a better location, quite possibly a better price, because I think if you're someone who's looking for a house and if you go and view it and you meet the vendors and you possibly talk to the estate agents, you start to form a relationship and you start to form a bit of an emotional bond and relationship with people. And once you do that, and then you've got to talk hard figures and potentially play hardball with people on prices, it gets a bit more difficult when you've become someone's friend almost. So if you've got a middle person who you can use to bounce off ideas, but also who's the person who will negotiate for you, you're perhaps you've then got someone on your side, just as the seller has got the estate agent on their side. You as the buying agent are on the purchaser's side, but you've got someone who's prepared to, perhaps, I wouldn't say be slightly cheeky, but be prepared to make some bold offers that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily do that as a purchaser.
Yeah, I suppose it was what you said. If you know the owners, like you're mixing, you become friends. It's nearly mixing business and pleasure, isn't it? Because then you're suddenly then hitting them with like you said, a bold offer, and they'll be like, "Well, he was my friend. Why has he done that suddenly?" And emotion kicks in. I think you're spot on.
So I think there's potential for that in negotiating to save potentially several £1,000s, depending on where you start from. Then there's all the saving time side of things. Particularly, I don't know. Let's say you're living in London and you want to move out to somewhere in South Suffolk. Sudbury is a lovely little town. It's just been voted it's just had the highest price rise in the UK, seemingly 13% price rise in last year. Popular town.
Which one was that?
This is Sudbury.
Oh wow, okay.
Sudbury is west of Ipswich. It's between Ipswich and Bury St Edmunds. Nice town, independent shops. Very lovely countryside, close to the lovely wool towns of Lavenham and Long Melford. Lovely spot. And it's got improved rail links that are promised into the main line coming down from Ipswich in the coming 2 or 3 years. So there's lots of things going for it. But if you're in London and you fancy moving to somewhere like that mid-Suffolk location, and perhaps you're a couple, you're both working, you've got children, let's say it's very difficult to suddenly drop everything and go and view a property. If you do that, perhaps that property was a complete waste of time. But equally, it could have been your ideal home, the one that you're destined to have. So it's having the time to be able to go on multiple viewings. Many of them will be fruitless, and therefore we're in a position where we can sort the wheat from the chaff, go on those multiple viewings, and then be able to say, well, I've seen these 5, 6, 7 properties, and actually these are the couple that we really need to go and see. And in turn then go on to do the legwork in organising the appointments, the viewing times, perhaps picking people up from a railway station somewhere to go and take them there, organising that time, saving them time, looking at wasted properties. And then when the deal is done, as you know, it's probably from end to end, deciding to move to moving in could easily be 6 months. You have agreed the price, but then it's a case of what happens between then and completion, and so many deals fall down for whatever reasons. And I mentioned earlier on, I've moved house 10 times, and I've experienced the stress and the hassle.
That's commendable in itself, because it's up there with death and divorce, supposedly. Moving house, so you've it's 10. Wow, that's just. And
all sorts of things can, as you know, go wrong, and quibbles and problems happen. And if you've got someone who's there, able to progress, chase, problem solve, ring people, chase up people, bottom out little issues until the day arrives when the removal van is there and the keys are in your hand.
As long as they don't forget half the furniture like they did with you that time.
That's right, yeah. That would be a bit of a faux pas to make, I suppose. But so ultimately it's having a person who's working exclusively for you, seeking out the best options for you, who's got some knowledge of where you're going, and can ask you perhaps lots of open questions that might help things move along in terms of what's your budget, what are your requirements for communications, what are your school needs, what sort of lifestyle do you lead, what sort of town or village or city do you like to live or in or be near. And it's flushing all those things out. And as you know, when we watch these programs like location, often the properties that people start off viewing aren't the properties they end up really wanting, and it changes their priorities, I suppose. So it's really having that sounding board and person on your side doing all that research. I think I once found out there's something like 3,000 estate agents in East Anglia, I believe.
Okay.
In total, there are something like 60,000 properties on the market at any one time.
Okay, wow.
So when you look at that, is the pond that's to go at, and it makes you realise, how much legwork there is required to be done potentially in any. Even if you narrow it down to a city or a town, there's still dozens to be contacted and lots of properties to be.
No, I think it's like you said, streets in London. You need to know the streets. You're knowing areas and towns, aren't you?
Yes.
And then obviously you've then got to dive into the right streets as well. So it's,
that's right.
Anyone who's moving out of London thinking of buying, in the home counties, for me it makes complete sense to give you a call to go and do it for you, because if I was thinking of doing it, I probably know about 3 towns that I've been to a few times, whereas you've got a very good taxi driver knowledge of towns by the sound of things, haven't you?
It's a lot of taxiing around the region, and it is. Well, I suppose no harm is done by turning the stone over, by actually picking up the phone to you or to me, whether it's London or whether it's Anglia, and saying, how might you be able to help? Because that's going to cost you nothing. That doesn't cost anything other than a little bit of time. And equally, I'm sure the same goes for you. You'll go along and meet somebody, and there's no obligation for them to do anything more than that, to listen to what they want and to say how you may be able to help. If at the end of the day I felt I couldn't help somebody for whatever reason, then I would tell them that, because it's a serious business finding somebody a house, and you've got to be committed, and you've got to know that you can do a good job for them. And so, but in going to see them, it costs you nothing to do that, and ultimately it's worth just turning that stone over and asking what might be available. And sometimes, if people perhaps don't necessarily want you to do the whole range of property finding, negotiating, helping them move in, they might just say, look, we live maybe in France, they may be abroad somewhere and want to move back to the UK. Perhaps in the following couple of months they're saying, well, we're coming back to look, but actually, can you be starting the search for us? Or actually, we've seen these 3 properties, can you go and look at them and tell us what you think? And that's all they'll want. They won't want you to negotiate for them. They don't want you to give them any more help, because we're all independent souls who like to do our own research.
Sure. You're the thing on the ground then, aren't you?
Yeah, and so it might be just make a few appointments for us and go and view them and tell us what you think. We'll do the rest after that. Or will you come with us on these viewings and tell us what you think? But they may not want the whole process. And for that, then it's a different form of service, but you fit in and dovetail with what people want, really.
It's fantastic. I think the one key thing here is, and I'll deal with estate agents in London who are not from the area and they're selling property that they know about for a few weeks. You've obviously got the historical knowledge of the area. You know what's happened. I can think of no better person probably than you to do the search, I would say. It's been fantastic. We've actually talked for quite some time.
I'm sorry.
How can anybody? No, it's been fantastic. How can anybody get in contact with you then if they're looking to buy property in the areas that we've spoke about?
Yes, the best way to get in contact with me, they would be very welcome to ring my mobile phone at any time of the day. I'll give that, but clearly it's something that can quickly get passed by on the radio. My mobile number is 07787 853 475, but my website is www.robertbrucerelocation.co.uk. That's robertbrucerelocation.co.uk. Hopefully you won't forget the name Robert Bruce anyway, and if you can put that in with property
we're not looking in Scotland, are we?
We're not looking in Scotland.
That's where the Robert Bruce is coming from.
That's right.
That's another show.
I haven't got any. My daughter went to St Andrews University, but other than that, I haven't got any other connections.
If they're Googling Robert Bruce, it's a very famous Scottish person or property finder in East Anglia.
But they can find me at Robert Bruce Relocation, or they can email me, which is just rb@robertbrucerelocation.co.uk. So it's
fantastic. And all Robert's details will be on the UK Health Radio website. And yeah, brilliant. I just want to say you're the first property finder I've interviewed. It's a little bit tricky because obviously I'm one myself, so I probably haven't grilled you as much as I should have done, but you've got to commend you on your knowledge of the area. So,
well, can I just chip in before you finish, Matt? And two things to say about Matt is that the reason we're here is that I read a piece in the Sunday Times, I think it was, about Matt doing a property search and commenting about it, being very helpful to some people in London. First-time buyers, I think they possibly were as well. So I called Matt because I wanted to pick his brains on his significant knowledge. And secondly, we also then got to talk about his radio show and the fact that actually he's got relatives in East Anglia as well. And it led to today's invitation to do a slot on his radio station. And I'm delighted to do that. Thank you very much, Matt, for giving me the opportunity.
Pleasure.
And before we came on air here, Matt was talking to me about some recent searches he's been doing this week, and believe me, it sounds like he's putting a lot of legwork into his most recent request. But
we'll follow up next week. I'm hoping to get a call that the offer's been accepted, so we'll see. But,
good, fingers crossed. But thank you anyway.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you for tuning in again today. I look forward to speaking with you next week when I'll be interviewing Kalin Mikhailov. He owns K&I Kitchens. It's in the name. Yes, he designs kitchens. So if you're planning some renovations or thinking of installing a new kitchen, have a listen with the show next week, and you hopefully get some good tips on what's in trend and how to go about it. So until next week, that's Matt Turner. That was The Property Show on UK Health Radio.